evening, everybody. Welcome to this dialogue with community and religious leaders on the security situation in Singapore. The last time we did a dialogue like this with all the community leaders was November 2014, it's 2.5 years ago. And in these two and a half years, many things have happened in the world. We've seen multiple attacks in the West and more frequent ones. Paris, Nice, London, Manchester, London again, Berlin, Australia, all over the world. In the Middle East, there's fierce fighting against ISIS in Syria and Iraq. And in Singapore, we are seeing a steady trickle of people who are getting self-radicalized. The government has been monitoring these developments very closely. We're very worried by the trends because the threat to Singapore has grown more serious. And the recent ISA arrests have brought the threat home vividly. We picked up one Sparkletot's infant care assistant, Shaikha Izzah Zahra Al-Ansari. We picked up two Ethos auxiliary police officers, Muhammad Khairul bin Muhammad and Muhammad Rizal bin Wahid. And we've had people picked up before, but I think these cases would have caused Singaporeans to perk up, take note, and wonder what it meant. Because these are Singaporeans who are living and working in our midst, taking care of our children and our security. And Khairul and Rizal were auxiliary police officers. They were trained to carry arms. So I felt uneasy. I felt that there would be a reaction from amongst the Muslims and also a reaction from amongst the non-Muslims to the developments. And I decided to invite you to this dialogue to talk candidly about this matter, to brief you on what's happening, to share our concerns with you, and to hear your views and your perspectives. The dialogue is closed door, but my speech is open for reporting. Last week, I met the Malay Muslim leaders, and I had a dialogue with them first because they're on the front line, and they bear the brunt of public attention whenever a terrorist attack happens. And they've done a tremendous job countering extremism, protecting our social fabric. So I wanted to hear their concerns and to let them know that the government is on their side. But I'm following up with this dialogue with community and religious leaders, not just the Malay and Muslim ones, because it's not their fight alone and because we're all in this together. ISD, I've asked them to give you a briefing on the terrorism situation, including sensitive information, which they wouldn't publish, but which I think they should share with you. But before ISD briefs you, let me sketch the perspective and share with you what my key concerns are. The attacks which we have seen, particularly the one in Nice where somebody took a truck and drove down the promenade and killed 70 over people, showed how easy it was to mount a terrorist attack, armed with nothing more than a heavy truck and maybe some knives to stab people with. And because people now see how easy it is to do, we are getting a series of copycat attacks in London, in Paris, in the other cities. And these are very difficult to detect and prevent because you don't need a lot of overt planning. You just rent a truck or hijack a truck, and then you are set and you can go anywhere. And the best that the security forces can do is to respond quickly to limit the damage and casualties. And the developed countries have improved their security response. So within minutes, the troops are there or the police officers are there and armed and able to take down the attackers. But that can limit the physical casualties. The harm which these attacks do go beyond the physical casualties because they spread fear, they erode trust, and they sow discord within the societies. That's in the developed countries. In the Middle East, ISIS is on the defensive, but ISIS is still a magnet for religious extremists. It's lost Mosul, but it is far from being wiped out. And even if ISIS doesn't regain the territory it had in Syria and Iraq, that doesn't mean its followers will disappear, because there are 10,000 of them, maybe more. And they will disperse and return to their home countries, including in Southeast Asia. And there, they may be disillusioned and maybe they know better, but they may carry the virus with them and bring the problems back home. Southeast Asia is on the front line because hundreds of Indonesians and Malaysians have gone to join ISIS. And some prominent ISIS fighters who are Indonesians or Malaysians have been actively recruiting from the Middle East using Facebook, using Telegram. And they're recruiting back home in Malaysia, in Indonesia, and directing attacks on their home countries, and also sometimes directing attacks on Singapore. In the southern Philippines, you know that there's a terrorism there's a serious problem. Marawi, a battle has been going on. The city is under siege, has been for several months, and the Philippine army has not got to the bottom of the problem yet. And ISIS has been using Marawi as propaganda to recruit more fighters and telling those who want to do jihad, go to the southern Philippines. ISIS wants to establish a wilayat in the southern Philippines. Wilayat meaning a region, an administrative grouping being loyal to ISIS. And if there's a wilayat in South Philippines, I think that will be a threat to the whole of Southeast Asia. Because then more people will go there and they will train there, they will radicalize one another there, and they will use that as a base to mount attacks on the rest of us in Southeast Asia. The Indonesians are very worried. So are the Malaysians. And they're worried because, not just because of the southern Philippines being next door, but because the ISIS influence is growing within Indonesia. And the Indonesian security forces have been zealous in hunting down terrorists, but actually beyond that, their options are limited. Because they don't have enough adequate laws to counter the terrorism threat. The parliament is very reluctant to pass the laws. They are afraid that laws will be abused. And so the government's hands are tied. From time to time, we find some Indonesian radicalized. We deport them back to Indonesia. Very often, the Indonesian government cannot do anything because they have not yet committed a terrorist attack. And you know that he intends to, but he hasn't done anything, so you can't do anything. So they are released to go back to their home villages. And we have to watch out in case they try to come to Singapore again. And now, with Islam being politicized in Indonesia, I think the problem is more difficult because you know the recent governor elections in Jakarta, when Islam became a big issue, and Ahok, the candidate who was at first leading, was defeated because he was non-pribumi, non-Muslim, and the campaign was, Muslims, you must vote for a Muslim leader. So this will make it even harder for the government to act decisively in Indonesia against extremists. In Malaysia, they have quite a serious situation too, which they are grappling with. They found more than a dozen Malaysian Armed Forces personnel who have been involved in ISIS. They experienced one attack, which was a year ago in Puchong and Selangor. And the Jemaah Islamiyah elements, the group which we found in Singapore, are also regrouping in Malaysia. So with all these things going on around us, I think it is quite unrealistic to think that we can have no worries at all and will be unaffected by any of this. Singapore is a target. We know it, they've said it, and they've acted on it. There's a group in Batam, or there was a group in Batam, the Khatibah Gonggong Rebus, which planned to launch rockets at Marina Sands from Batam. Fortunately, the Indonesian security forces disrupted them, arrested the group. But we know that there are others out there. And we also know of other attacks that had been planned but had not been carried out. Maybe not yet, but maybe, hopefully, will not be carried out. But they have us in their sights, and we have to know that. Just as worrying are some of the things happening within Singapore. First, we've discovered some foreign workers who have been radicalized. We repatriated, as I told you, several Indonesians, including domestic maids who had become radicalized here. And then we arrested 40 Bangladeshi workers. They had formed a radical group here, and they were planning extremist actions against Bangladesh and other countries. Terrorist operations planned out of Singapore. How do you know they won't do anything in Singapore? Nobody can say. Secondly, apart from foreigners, we are seeing a steady trickle of self-radicalized Singaporeans. We pick up one every month or two in recent years. And the recent cases, Shaikha Izzah, Khairul and Rizal, they are not the first, neither will they be the last cases. If we are attacked by foreign terrorists, that's one thing. I think that's bad, but we can understand and, well, I think we can pick ourselves up. But if we are attacked by Singaporean terrorists, our own citizens attack our own country, I think the psychological impact will be much worse. So we have to know this is happening. The third thing which worries us are the extremist and exclusivist teachings which are creeping into the mainstream. In Singapore, all the religions practice our faiths in a multiracial society. But in other countries, it may not be so. And with Islam particularly, if I speak candidly, it is not always so. In some countries, you have a different form of Islam, which rejects accommodation with other faiths, which divides between Muslims and non-Muslims. So, for example, Muslims will not shake hands with non-Muslims. They will not wish Christians Merry Christmas or Hindus Happy Deepavali. And they will not accept non-Muslim leaders for a Muslim community. These are interpretations of Islam which are intolerant not just of non-Muslims, but also of Muslims who do not subscribe to these teachings. And these are exclusivist views. Exclusivist meaning we keep to ourselves and we stay apart from others. And if these exclusivist views take root in Singapore, it will weaken our racial harmony and make us more vulnerable to a terrorist threat. And it will also encourage a backlash. There will be Islamophobia. Non-Muslims will begin to see Muslims in a negative light. And I think that would be very bad and equally unacceptable. So I think we have to work very hard to maintain our multiracial and multireligious society. Our religious leaders all understand the need for accommodation. They reject extremist ideologies. They oppose exclusivist teachings. And all the communities live side by side. We interact with one another, each one practicing our own faiths and customs peacefully. I just went down on a jalan-jalan along Telok Ayer Street and Southbridge Road. And you can find within a few hundred meters places of worship of all the different religions. Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, Taoists, Christians, mosques, shrines, temples, all coexisting peacefully, all neighbors and friends. And they've been there for more than 100 years, some of them nearly 200 years, dating back to almost the foundation of Singapore. So Singapore is an oasis of peace. But we live in a dangerous world. And therefore, we have to try our best to insulate ourselves and inoculate ourselves from the conflicts and the quarrels in other countries. When we see religious conflicts elsewhere, we have to remind ourselves, those are not our fights. Whatever the problems in Syria and Iraq, they are not our problems. And we must not let events elsewhere erode the trust and harmony between the different races and religions in Singapore. So that is what we must understand. But at the same time, the reality is, it's not possible for us to disconnect ourselves completely from the world. Our people follow the news, not just on TV, but on the social media. You see pictures, you see videos, you see powerful messages, sometimes inflammatory messages. And it's human for us to have a reaction and sometimes to get worked up and to take sides. So when racial and religious conflicts happen elsewhere, it can have an impact on Singapore. In fact, the Singaporeans who have become self-radicalized, they must have had some psychological problems of their own, but they were also motivated by conflicts in the Middle East and by the teachings of ISIS. And when a terrorist attack happens somewhere else, maybe inspired by ISIS or Al-Qaeda, it can affect attitudes and perceptions of Muslims and non-Muslim Singaporeans towards each other in Singapore. So we have to expect the recent spate of ISIS-inspired attacks in the world, the situation in the Middle East, and what's happening in Southeast Asia around us, and some of the things happening even in Singapore, to have caused some doubts and qualms among Singaporeans. Muslims once again feeling put under the spotlight, non-Muslims perhaps worrying at least a little bit whether they can trust the Muslims as much as before. Fortunately, our racial and religious harmony is strong, and religious leaders have worked hard to promote interfaith relations, and we have to keep up this effort to repair the harm done by external events and to strengthen the trust between the different faiths. Then, when an extremist attack does take place in Singapore, the different religions will stay together to tackle this common problem and will not turn away from each other, or worse, turn against one another. The racial and religious harmony we have in Singapore is very precious. We just celebrated Racial Harmony Day this last weekend. I think we have a reason to celebrate. What we have didn't happen by chance. It's happened through many years of patient accommodation, adjustments, some hard spots along the way, but finally everybody coming together and understanding in Singapore, this is the way we have to live. To accommodate one another, to exercise give and take, and different races, different religions, one nation, one Singapore. And that's why we are able to discuss these sensitive issues honestly and candidly and tackle the challenges together. And that's what I hope to do with you tonight in the briefing and then the dialogue later with all of you. And I hope you will help me in our common task, which is to build this trust and meet the challenges ahead that we're going to face. Thank you very much.